One of the challenges is, um, particularly if you're African American, and if you're not, we don't know our history like we should. And when you don't know your history, you allow other people to tell your story from their perspective. Right, so it's important to know your history. All right, let me start off though, and I actually took this part out of my presentation, but I'll slip a section in. I was asked just a few minutes ago what my office does, and so I'll give you the real short version. There are 9 regional conferences. I'm going to tell you in a few minutes, there's 2 kinds of churches in North America. I'm sorry, 2 kinds of conferences. Conferences are all the churches in an area that come together to form a organizational unit. Okay, so you have all the churches in an area, they form a conference. All the conferences in an area form a union. All the unions form a division. And there are 13 divisions that form the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. So, that's the worldwide church, okay? So my office coordinates all the things that the 9 regional conferences plus the 2 West Coast unions. My office coordinates all the things that we do together. Okay, so let me give you an example of something that we do together. We do a number of things together. Okay, about 5 years ago now, we decided that it was very important to connect with our brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa. Because if you're African American, that's where your roots are. All right? Okay. Now, what most people don't know, and what I suspect you don't know either, is roughly half of all Seventh-day Adventists live on the continent of Africa. Okay. Yeah. So, what that means is the largest single demographic group in the church by far. There's no other group that comes close demographically in terms of the number of people. The largest number of Seventh-day Adventists are people of African descent. Either they live in Africa or their forefathers came from Africa. So, oh, thank you. I was wondering what that was. See, you can't give old people technology. I was saying, because I was saying, I was saying, what is this? Okay, all right, okay. So when you combine the people who are African, who live in Africa, and then you combine the people who live in the Caribbean, they came from Africa. The people who live in the United States of African descent, and the people who live in Canada, plus the people in Europe who are from African descent, that's the largest single group of people. Well over half of all Seventh-day Adventists have African roots. Okay. Then the next largest group are people of Spanish descent. Okay. So those two groups make up roughly 75 to 80% of all Adventists. So, yeah. And I'm trying to say this carefully. While the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a worldwide church, did you know that 90% of all the countries in the world have either a Seventh-day Adventist church, hospital, or school? 90% of all the countries. Okay? So the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a worldwide church. all right? The largest group in that worldwide church are people of African descent. So about 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, we said, okay, it would be a good idea for us to connect with people with whom we share a common culture. And so in 2018, Mrs. Edmond and I went to Kenya, and we met with the president. I'll show you the picture in a minute. With the president of the what's called the East Central African Division. That's all the churches in the eastern part of Africa, okay? And we said to him, would you be interested in a summit meeting between the African American leadership and the African leadership? And he said yes. So it became my office's responsibility to organize the summit, because you can't just, it was about 30 people from the United States. They just couldn't just show up. Somebody had to arrange for the housing, and somebody had to arrange for the meals. Somebody had to arrange for the transportation, because the difference in terms of time, the airport in Nairobi was an hour away from the school, Adventist University of Africa, where we were meeting. So my office arranged for everybody to be picked up and transported, because what you don't want is to show up in a foreign country and have no idea of what's going to happen next. Yeah. I'll tell you, Ms. Edmond and I went first. We went to Kenya. Even though we knew somebody was picking us up, it was still disconcerting to land in a foreign country and not know who's going to pick you up. You know, I'm going to tell you what's even more disconcerting is to be picked up by somebody that you don't know. You know, at least in Kenya, we kind of figured that they were Adventists. When we were in, Ms. Edmond and I were in we were in Italy, and we were about an hour from the airport, and the taxi guy came and picked us up, and we said, boy, they could take us somewhere and nobody would ever know where. He didn't speak English. We didn't speak Italian. It was like, okay, he could take us anywhere. But anyway, so we arranged all of that so that people would at least know somebody was picking them up. So then we arranged the agenda and all that sort of thing. So my office coordinates the things that we do together. Most of you have heard of Breath of Life. You've heard of Breath of Life? Okay. My office subsidizes Breath of Life. We give them approximately $300,000 a year so they can pay their staff and do evangelism and all that sort of thing. Okay? I'll give you one more example, and you'll see that example in part of my presentation. A year and a half ago, we moved into a 32,000 square foot office that houses our major ministries. Breath of Life is on the first floor of our office building. All right? It was our responsibility to hire the architect, arrange for the financing, design the building, all that sort of thing. Our office did that. And the wonderful thing, and I'm going to tell you the full story in the presentation, is that building cost $9 million. When we moved in a year and a half ago, we owed $0. And I'm going to explain to you how that happened. But if those of you who've bought houses, you know that typically over the life of your mortgage, by the time you pay your mortgage, you've paid that house 3 times over. Okay? in mortgage. So it would have cost us $20 million to borrow that $9 million. But instead, that's $20 million that's going to go into some area of ministry instead of going to a bank. Okay? So our office was responsible for leading out in that. Okay. But that gives you some idea of what. So my job is to work with all the conferences and the churches out here. And so I do a lot of traveling, probably 45 weeks a year, weekends a year, in different churches. Last week, I was in Southern California. The week before in Minnesota. Next week, I'm trying to think of where will I be next week? Somewhere. Oh, shoot. That's terrible. No, I won't be on. No, I know that. I won't be on. Where? I can't even think of where I will be next week. But anyway, when you travel that often, sometimes you literally wake up in a hotel room and not know where you are. But it's been a wonderful it's been a wonderful experience. I'm thankful. I've met a lot of wonderful people just like you today. All right, now I'm supposed to do what am I supposed to do with this? Now he gave it to me. I go up, press. Okay, tell me. I've never seen one of these. Okay. See. Uh-oh. I did something, didn't I? See, that's why my office does not trust me with technology. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna let you do it we'll just do the next slide thing. One of the things while he's fixing what I messed up, one of the things that we have in our building is one of only 2 Adventist African American history museums. So where we actually tell the story of Adventist African American history in our museum. All right, let's go to the next slide. I'm gonna let you. I don't trust. Okay. Now, that's the next slide, right? The second slide? Okay, now, remember I told you, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, except for the West Coast is an exception. Everywhere else in the United States, there are 2 kinds of conferences. One type of conferences are called state conferences. Those are all the churches coming together in a state. For example, Oregon Conference, Washington Conference, Upper Columbia, which includes Washington and Oregon. All right. I think is Washington, Oregon, is Washington, Idaho. Idaho. Okay, very good. All right. The second kind are called regional conferences. Okay, regional conferences, when people think of regional conferences, they think of conferences that are black. Okay, there's 2 things that are not accurate about that. One is regional conferences are all the churches in a region. Okay, now, the reality is the vast majority of the people in those churches are black or Latino, but some of them aren't. Okay, so the term regional conference does not refer to ethnicity; it refers to territory. Okay, all right. Now, here's the thing that you may or may not know, and if you do know, you probably don't understand why. In the same area, you have both regional conferences and state conferences. Same area, same city. All right? So let's use, Pasco is kind of is a little small, so we'll use Seattle. Okay? If Seattle were in the eastern part of the country, you would have both regional conference churches in Seattle and state conference churches in Seattle. Okay, I'm going to come to you. It's a good question. Just a little early, all right? Very, very good, but it's a very good question. So let's use Lake Region, okay? The largest city in Lake Region is Chicago. That's where Pastor Watkins is from, right? Oh, you're from there too? Okay, that's the largest city in Lake Region, all right? Okay, in Chicago, you have churches that belong to Lake Region, but also churches that belong to the Illinois Conference, okay? So the question is, why do you need two separate conferences in the same territory, all right? When I worked in the South Central Conference office, the South Central Conference office was 10 miles away from the Kentucky-Tennessee Conference office. So you had two headquarters of two separate organizations belonging to the same church in the same city. All right? Okay? I'll take it a step further. If I'm remembering correctly, and I'm at the age now where that doesn't always happen. All right? All right. Okay. Any old people like me have the experience of I'll be in my office, I'll be upstairs, remember I need something downstairs, and by the time I get downstairs, I forgot what it was. Anybody? Yeah. But no, but it's really bad. It's really bad. So then you go back upstairs, and then, oh, okay, now I remember. And then you go downstairs again, and you forget again. Yeah. But you know what? I'm glad to be old. Any old people glad to be old? Yeah. Because the alternative is not good. Yeah. So because when you think about it, the goal is to get old. That's the goal. That's the goal. All right. So, okay. So now we're going to answer. So I was saying, I don't remember, but I think this is true. We have a church, we have a city that has a regional conference church and a state conference church, not just in the same city, but on the same street. On the same street. Okay? So, yeah. So the question is why? All right? And our regional conferences who came second, are they an unnecessary duplication? All right? Why do we need both? All right. Okay, so now let's go to Lake Region. Okay. I'm going to demonstrate this I'm going to show you what I mean. So I'm going to need you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to need you 5 ladies to help me, okay? Okay, so I need you to get up and come right here, right across here. All right. And since you asked a question, I'm going to start with you. So I'm going to move you down here, okay? I'm going to have you all switch. Okay. All right. Okay, no, and you know what? I need another. Can I borrow you two? All right, I'm going to put you on down there with Pastor. Okay, now, the question is, why do we need regional conferences? Because they came second. And people say, okay, we really don't need regional conferences because they duplicate what state conferences do. All right? So, inside of Lake Region, which is in Illinois, okay, we have the states. Lake Region covers Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. They cover all that. They cover all that territory. All right. So you are Lake Region. You're Miss Lake Region. All right. Okay. Now you cover all those states, right, by yourself. Inside the same territory of Lake Region, you have 5 state conferences, right? Okay. Okay. So you're going to be the Illinois conference. You're going to be the Indiana conference. You're going to be the Michigan conference. You're going to be Wisconsin. You're going to be Minnesota. All right? So there's one of her. There's 5 of you. All right? Okay, now, she has her own conference office. Very nice office outside of Chicago. Okay? But guess what? You have a conference office. 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 Right? Okay. She has a conference president. His name is Elder Garth Gabriel. He's the president. But guess what? You have a president. 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 All right? She has her own campground. It's in Michigan. Cassopolis. That's right. You remember it. That's right. Okay. She has a campground. But she has a campground. 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 He. Sorry. Okay. He. You're okay. You know who you are. That's right. That's right. Okay. Inside of her office are people who work for the conference office. Like I used to be a youth director. You have youth director, education director. So she has a youth director, but she has a youth director. She has a youth director. She has a youth director. He has a youth director. Okay? All right? So everything that she has, all of them have. All right? All right? Now, so let me ask you a question. Who do you think costs more to operate? Her one entity or all 5 of them? Yeah, who say costs more? It literally costs tens of millions of dollars more to operate all of them than her. So, while they accuse her of duplication, who's really duplicating? Yeah, okay? Even though she operates at 60% of their income. In other words, they have almost twice as much money individually as she has. Okay? And collectively, tens of millions of dollars more to operate. Tens of millions. But she has grown over the 80 years since she's been in existence. She has grown 4 times faster than them. Even though, so she has done more with less. But this is what they say to her. We don't believe in what they call separate conferences. So let's all come together. Sounds good, right? Except when they say let's all come together, what they really mean is they want her to shut down and join them. Yeah, no, okay. All right. But when you don't know your history, you swallow the Kool-Aid. Okay. All right. That says she's not necessary. Okay. And I'm just going to be honest. In fact, let me say this real quickly, because this is one, and I want to affirm this group. This is one of the few, even halfway, your church I'm talking about, is one of the few even halfway integrated entities that we have in the Seventh-day Adventist Church that isn't run by the majority culture. In other words, in the Adventist Church, the only integration we have, except for a few entities, few churches like yours, comes when African Americans or people of color go to the majority culture. Very rarely does it work the other way around. All right? So what this group says is we want to come together, but they don't mean coming together under any other way except her coming to them. They don't mean we coming to you. Okay? All right. Let's give my helpers a hand. Thank you. Very good. Very good. Very good. Okay. Now. All right. All right. Where's my person that hits this for me? Where did he go? Okay. Oh, okay. So he's going to let you do it. All right, very good. Okay. Okay, very good. Okay, yeah. So remember I told you each of those have, let's keep going because I already said that. Pastor, yeah, tap it again. Okay. Okay, now, there are not, remember I told you there are 9 regional conferences? Inside the same territory of the 9 regional conferences are 30 state conferences. 30. Those 30 state conferences literally cost hundreds of millions of dollars more to operate than the 9 regional conferences in the same territory. Okay? Now, understand that I am not in any way saying those 30 regional conferences, 30 state conferences are not needed. They are. They absolutely are. Okay? Because the reason why we have regional conference, there's several reasons, but let me give you one at the top. It is easier to evangelize people who have the same culture and cultural background in you. It's easier. It's not impossible, but it's easier. And let me give you an example. Okay? We were asked, the regional conferences were asked to go overseas and do evangelism overseas. We were asked. So a number of us volunteered to go, okay? I was assigned to Honduras, okay? I said, okay, I need you to reassign me because I don't speak Spanish, okay? And so even though they said, well, Elder Edmond, we'll get you a translator, and so that person will translate your sermons for you, okay? And that yes. Okay, the Inter-American Division that runs the work over there, they asked us to come, and then we signed up for where we wanted to go. I signed up for Trinidad, but the meeting that they were going to do in Trinidad was not at the time when I could go. So then they said, okay, Elder Edmond, the time that you said you can go, Honduras is open, go to Honduras. And I said, but the problem is I don't speak English. I don't speak Spanish. So I have to have it translated. Well, I've preached with a translator before. It can be done, but it's much more difficult. Here's why it's difficult. The first thing that makes it difficult is you have to cut your sermon in half because the person that's translating is preaching your sermon, okay? So today, if I had a translator, I would have had to cut the sermon in half or we would have been here longer. We would have been here twice as long, okay? So you have to cut your sermon in half. One time, I preached in a place where they had 2 separate languages, and I had to have my sermon translated twice, okay? So I had to cut it again. No, it was I actually enjoyed that because I would say something, I would be preaching, and then the other guy, he would preach, and then the other guy, he would preach, okay? But somebody who's not good at translating can kill you. And I've had, because translating is difficult, okay? Because you have to hear the person preach, and then you have to immediately translate it. You know, you can't sit around and say, no. When I say it, you gotta come right behind me, okay? And so that is actually a gift. When you talk about the gift of tongues, that's the gift of tongues, okay? But I did not want to chance having a bad translator, okay? And the other thing, now, you can have a good translation, but until you've done it a couple of times, you don't understand that everything in English does not readily translate. Like slang, you know, a slang expert. So I didn't know that when I first started preaching to Spanish congregations, I didn't know that certain slang, expressions that we have do not easily translate into another language. So I would just be preaching, and I said, blah, 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 blah. And then the guy would say, what? He's trying to figure out how to translate that. So I just said, you know what? Let me not take a chance. I need you guys to reassign me, okay? Because it's easier. It's not impossible, but it's easier to share the gospel with someone inside your culture, okay? All right, okay. So we need state conferences because it's easier in a country that has the racial problems that we've had for now 400 years, before we were a country. It's still easier for me to reach people who look like me than people who don't. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't reach people who don't, because we can. I can. But it's easier, okay? And I'm going to tell you, one of the challenges we have right now in regional conferences is what's called gentrification. You know what gentrification is? Gentrification is people, Caucasians, moving back into the inner city. And the reason why they do that is, what they do is they buy property that doesn't cost a whole lot of money, and then they fix it up. And now what it does is it raises the property taxes. That's what it does, okay? But somebody has to reach those people. They're in our neighborhoods. We got to figure out how to reach them, okay? And that is a new phenomenon, you know, people moving back into areas that used to be black, urban areas. They're in the inner city, the hood. I preached in West Philadelphia a couple years ago. That's the Fresh Prince in West Philadelphia, born and raised. Yeah, I preached in West Philadelphia. That was a black church. But when I left that church after doing this seminar, I had my younger sister with me because she lives in Washington. When we turned the corner from the church, all of a sudden there's all these Caucasians who've moved back into an area where only black people used to live. Okay, somebody has to reach those people with the gospel. They're in our neighborhood. We need to do that. Except none of us were trained to do that. So that may mean if I was still a conference president, I would have to in a regional conference where most of the people are black, I would have to hire some Caucasian pastors, which I actually did. Okay, because it's easier for them to reach. Okay. So when people say, "Oh, that's separation, segregation," no, it's what's the best way to spread the gospel. Okay, and regional conferences have done that well enough that they've grown 4 times faster than the rest of the church. All right. Let's go to the next slide. Uh-oh, am I standing in your way? Okay, now, let's talk about, we're going to, as we move to the section on Black Adventist history, let's talk about 3 pivotal figures in African American history, okay? Here's the first one, Charles M. Kinney. Charles M. Kinney was the first African American pastor to be ordained. Ordination is a biblical term and a church term that means the church's recognition of the call of God on an individual pastor's life. Okay? So that's what ordination is. Ordination is us saying to Pastor Watkins, we've looked at your work and we recognize that you've been called by God. Okay? It's a formal service that formally recognizes the call of God on an individual pastor's life. Now, honestly, one of the big, I don't want to use the word fights, especially since I'm not sure everybody's Adventist here, but just being honest, one of the big fights in the Adventist church is over the issue of whether we should ordain women. Okay? Okay? Now, you guys on the West Coast have pretty much said we're gonna ordain women. And for me, when you think about the fact that ordination is simply the church recognizing the call of God, okay, it doesn't make sense for me to hire Pastor Watkins and then say she's not called. If she's not called, I shouldn't hire her in the first place. Okay? Okay? And what significant sections of the church has said is the fact that she's a female means that we're not going to recognize that call. To which I say, okay, if you're going to say she's not called, then don't hire her in the first place. But once we hire her, then we're saying that she's called. Otherwise, we shouldn't have ever hired her. Then the other thing is, once she does, we subject females to a standard we don't subject men to. With men, we say, what have they done in terms of, have they demonstrated through baptizing people and all that kind of thing? We look at what they've done. With women, we just look at who they are. We just say, you know what? You're a female. We're not recognizing your call. Okay. All right. So now, before you look too far down on the people who take that position, all of us, to some degree or another, are products of our background. Okay? And so for a lot of us, including me once upon a time, we could not conceive of anybody doing ministry other than a man. Because that's all we knew. Okay? And so I'll tell you what made me change. Okay? Because I remember the first time when I was, as a young person, one of my friends said, who was a female, I want to be a pastor. And I honestly said, that's the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard. That's what I said. I said that, okay? Because I had no frame of, I'd never heard of a female pastor. Never been did not know. Okay, but here's what happened. See, sometimes the Lord puts you in situations that make you change. This is what happened. I was a young pastor, and I just have to be honest, I had some of the most trifling men in the history of church. I did. And so I did. And so I had an elder, right? I had an elder, man. He was having an affair with one of the younger women in my church, you know? And I knew, bless her heart, I knew the young woman. She was an airhead. She was. But you know what? He was not interested in her head. He wasn't. He was not interested. So I'm this young pastor. This brother is old enough to be my father. And so, you know, I'm going up to him stammering. I'm saying, my brother, you can't do this. And I never will forget what he said. I never will forget. And it reminds me of, number one, the deceitfulness of sin. And number two, how when we are determined to do what we want to do, we can talk ourselves into it, even if it means talking ourselves into hell. But it will make sense to us. This is what he said to me. This is what he said. He said, I believe that God is going to be glorified in this relationship. That's an exact quote. An exact quote. I'm not telling you what somebody said he said. I'm saying what he said to me. So I had to sit him down. That was a small church. Only had 2 elders. So now I only have one. The other one, good guy. Wasn't a thing wrong with him, but he was a member of another church. They should not have elected him elder in that church. So eventually he went back to his church. Good guy. Good, fine fella. Became an educator. I still see him every now and then. But he went back to his church. So I went from 2 to 1 to none. So now I just have to deal with the deacons. Well, my head deacon, he never paid tithe. So I had to sit him down. Then I had another deacon. He lived out of wedlock with a lady so long, I thought they were married. So, no, I did. So she's not a member, so she comes to church, and so I say, oh, we're so glad to have Mrs. So-and-so with us today. She pulled me aside. She said, no, Pastor, we're not married. I had to sit him down, all right? Then I had another deacon. He was an alcoholic who owned a liquor store. I had to sit him down. Pretty soon, there was no elders, no deacons, just me. I have 2 churches. So now I can't be in 2 places at one time. So you know what I had to do? I had to swallow my pride and call my friend who was 40 miles away and say, you know what? Remember what I said about women in minutes? Forget that I said it. I need you to come. I need you to come and preach for me. And that was the first of 2 things that taught me, do not tell the Lord who he can use. Amen. Okay? Here's the second thing. By this time I had learned my lesson, but the thing that sealed the deal was I became a conference president, and I went to Andrews to hire some pastors. The person that was most highly recommended to me was a female. So I go and interview her. Very impressive young lady. She has everything that I'm looking for. So I said, my job is to get the best people into this conference. I said, this lady has everything I'm looking for. Why should I pass her by because she's wearing a dress? Now, if she were a man and she's wearing a dress, then we got a problem. Yeah. Okay. But so we and they had never hired anybody in South. They had never hired a female in South Central. I was the first person. I went from saying having women is ridiculous to being the first president to ever hire a female. Okay, and we hired several after that. And oh yeah, some of you may have heard of Lola Moore Johnson. Fantastic preacher. I mean, a fantastic preacher. This is what happened. In South Central, we had a tradition at your first camp meeting. You preached at camp meeting, all right? So we hired Pastor. She was Lola Moore then. She's Johnson. She's got married, and she preached, and she did an excellent job. And I was sitting there listening, and I had some unholy thoughts because it was like, so there, what y'all got to say now? which was not very spiritual. but pardon? Oh yeah, I don't even remember. That was a long time ago. But it was like, so what y'all have to say now? Because I had spent a year going around the conference saying, okay, guys, this is what's going to happen. We are going to expand our staff. That means whoever's, I said, we're going to hire some Caucasians. I did. We're going to hire some females. We did. Because if we're trying to reach everybody, then we need all kinds of workers, right? So I need y'all to remember that because I'm about to say some things that are difficult. So I don't want y'all to think I'm some angry black man. The reality is I believe in integration. I also know that the Adventist church that I love and that my family has been a part of, my grandmother joined this church after hearing Edson White on the Morning Star in Vicksburg, Mississippi. That's almost as far back as black Adventists go. When I was growing up, I had no non-Adventist relatives in my family on either side. I tell people I'm the king of Adventists, okay? And that's just how my family was. But this is God's church. I love it. Educated in all Adventist schools and then became an Adventist pastor. Adventism is the only thing that I know. As a matter of fact, I married somebody. Remember I told you that my wife is different than me. My wife is different than me here. That she and her mother and her sister are the only Adventists in a very large family. Okay, my father-in-law was not Adventist. Wonderful person, but he was not Adventist. He was a contractor who built the Adventist church and did not charge them anything but the materials. Wonderful fellow. Okay, but he was Baptist, and so I go to visit my wife, who was my girlfriend at that time, and I'm visiting her on Sabbath, right? And so I go into the kitchen and I hear something I've never heard in my life. I hear a television playing on the Sabbath. I didn't know that TVs worked on the Sabbath because I'd never heard a TV on. That was before Breath of Life and all that kind of stuff. I had never heard a TV on the Sabbath before. All right, so and then my mother-in-law is fixing my father-in-law. She's fixing my father-in-law's food. She's fixing frog legs and chitlins, and it's like, this is a zoo up in here, because I had never been around chitlins. They smell terrible. How did y'all do that? Oh, but I'm sorry. Yeah, I did. Okay, those of you who became Adventists from someplace else, you know what I'm talking about. But I had never. Adventism was all I knew. So my point is that I'm gonna share some things in this. Even though I believe in integration and diversity, and I believe in this church, here's the truth. The Adventist church and the United States both share an ugly past with racism. They just do. And we can either pretend that that's not true, but then that means we have to deny our own history. And we've reached a place in the United States where there's certain politicians who say, we don't want to talk about that because it makes our children uncomfortable. To which I say, if it's uncomfortable for you to hear it, how uncomfortable was it for my family to live it? Okay. So part of this is our history. Just is. Okay, so he got ordained. Remember, we defined what ordination is, right? But he's the only black person. So he gets ordained in Nashville in the South in the 1890s. Okay, so you can imagine the drama of this black man coming with his black family to sit with these white people in the South. Drama. Because they weren't thinking about ordination. They thinking about these black people in their building. It's like, no, y'all need to get up out of here. And so his thinking was, okay, you know what? We're not going to leave the church, but we might be better off with our own institutions because we're not welcome. Here, this is the ugly truth about the Adventist church that I love and will believe to my dying day. is God's church. You cannot tell me this is not God's church. But it was every bit as segregated as the rest of society. Every bit. All right? So he was the first one to say, we might be better off with our own entities. Here's the second pivotal figure in Adventism, Claude Barnett. Claude Barnett is a pivotal figure in Adventism without actually being Adventist. All right? So, Elder Edmond, how can he be pivotal in Adventism without being Adventist? I'm glad you asked that question. He was a newspaper reporter. Back in those days, in the 30s and the 40s, if you were black, you could not write for the Seattle Times or the Spokane whatever. In those days, even when I was a little boy, you had black newspapers, okay? He was one of the foremost black journalists. He had an Adventist friend, Owen Troy, who was a pastor actually out on the West Coast. And Owen Troy told him, Owen Troy Sr., there's an Owen Troy Jr. now. He's older too, that was a long time ago. But he told Claude Barnett about the challenges of being a black Seventh-day Adventist in a segregated church. So here, let me give you an example. At the world headquarters of Seventh-day Adventism, at lunchtime, guess who couldn't eat in the general conference cafeteria? Okay, all of y'all. Okay, couldn't do it. All right. At Andrews, which is where you and I went, you could eat in the cafeteria, but you had to eat at the colored table. Yeah, okay. Okay. The Adventist church was every bit as segregated, and so were most other churches, by the way. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, even I hadn't heard that. Okay. And so Claude Barnett wrote about this and embarrassed the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay, but let's go to the next slide, because here is the straw that broke the camel's back. Lucy Byard. Okay, Lucy Byard was a Caribbean woman who lived in New York, had a form of cancer, wanted to be treated in an Adventist hospital. Adventist healthcare is big. I'll give you an example. The largest employer in the state of Florida is not Disney, it's Adventist healthcare. Okay, all right. That's the biggest. That's the biggest. And I tell all the Adventist workers, if you ever get a chance to work for the Adventist healthcare system, take it, because they're not on the Adventist pay scale. Okay, so that's the one place in the church that has money. So Pastor Watkins, I know you love them, but if the healthcare system calls you, you gotta go. In fact, if they call me right now, this meeting is over, I'm going to go work for them. All right? Okay. Well, but somebody has to go work for them. They do. I was on their board, and one of the policies we have in the Adventist church is you have to do what's called a salary audit, where you go over what everybody makes. Okay, so we sitting around doing a salary audit of the CEO of Adventist Healthcare, and I said, y'all know he makes what 20 of us make. And it was true. Because healthcare he was getting paid what healthcare executives make, and not what Adventist preachers make. Okay? So the rest of us are tied to a scale. Okay? They're not tied to the Adventist scale. So anyway, Lucy Byard, even then, obviously it wasn't nearly as big then as it is now, but she wanted to be treated in an Adventist hospital. In those days, you wrote to get admitted? Well, by writing, then, because she lived in New York. So she wrote, she got admitted. They didn't know she was black. If they had known she was black, she wouldn't have gotten there, because both the Adventist Church and the state of Maryland had a policy that forbade black people to be treated in white hospitals. Okay? So she goes, because she's lighter, we paid a bunch of money to get this. This is a portrait, because we really didn't have a portrait. But she was actually lighter than that. She was so light, they thought she was white. So they admitted her until either, I don't remember whether it was her husband that showed up, or they looked at her application. I don't remember anyway. But anyway, they discovered she was black. Once they discovered she was black, you know what they did? They kicked her out of the hospital. They kicked this dying woman out of the hospital, sent her to Washington Freedmen's Hospital. That was a black hospital. Sent her across town. Ironically, Washington Freedmen's Hospital is now Howard University Hospital, which is now an Adventist hospital. Okay, a young lady that I grew up with is the CEO of the, making a lot more money than I am. She's the CEO of that hospital. That was like the last straw. And see, what made, providentially, it happened in Washington, where there were a higher number than normal of educated black people for that day. Okay? So this is 1943. Okay? In that church, Washington First Church, was a lady by the name of Eva Dykes. If you've been to Oakwood, the library is named after her. Eva Dykes was the first black woman, not the first black Adventist woman, but the first black woman, period, to finish the requirements for a PhD. Okay? The second woman to finish the requirements also went to that church. And so they did what Adventists do. They formed a committee. That's what Adventists do. They formed a committee, and they basically said to the General Conference, enough. Enough discrimination in education. For years, there were schools, Adventist schools, that black people could not attend. Enough discrimination in employment. Do you know it took the Adventist Church 100 years to have the first black General Conference administrator? 100 years. Okay, so they said enough. And then, next slide. Then on April 8 through 11, the General Conference, in what's their spring meeting. Most people think the General Conference only meets every 5 years. No, the executive committee, or the board, what you would call the board, they meet twice a year, spring and fall. In their spring meeting, the General Conference voted to have what's called colored conferences. Remember, we were colored in those days. Okay, and the part of the action said colored conferences to be administered by colored pastors and colored laymen. Why was that important? Because up to that time, black people were not allowed to run hardly anything. Okay? When I was growing up, the only black leaders I saw were in the church. When I was growing up, there were no black mayors, there were no black governors, there were no black senators. We could not imagine a black person being the president. Didn't even occur to us. In sports, there were no black coaches, no black managers, no black quarterbacks. If it was a leadership position, black people didn't have it. Let me tell you how far this went. The first 3 presidents of Oakwood were white. Okay? Because there were no regional conferences, the black work was run at the General Conference level under the what was called the Negro Department. Just like you had the women's ministries and the youth department, you had the Negro Department. The first 3 directors of the Negro Department were Caucasian. The Negro department, headed by Caucasians. Because even in Africa, the lead positions in Africa were white Europeans and white North Americans. Okay? Because black people were not allowed to run anything. So this action was significant in two ways. One, it allowed black people to have leadership. But the second thing was, that was a vote of the General Conference, which was overwhelmingly white in those days. Why is that significant? Regional conferences did not occur because black people got mad and left. Regional conferences occurred because white people, given a choice between integration and black conferences, said, you can have black conferences instead of integration, okay? So now what we have is the reverse of that. We have our Caucasian brethren saying, okay, let's all come together. What that really means is we were not ready for integration. Now we are, and that means we want you to shut down the institutions that we made you start when we weren't ready for integration. Okay. But you don't know that if you don't know your history. If you don't know your history, you swallow the Kool-Aid that says, let's all come together. That sounds good. I would actually be for that if coming together really meant coming together. It doesn't mean that. It means shut what you have down, even though what you have has worked. Doesn't matter. We don't care that it works. We shut it down. Yes. Why haven't we shut it down? Because for the sake of, because what we have works, and it has accrued to the spread of the gospel, which is the thing that's most important. Okay. All right. Let's go to and I have a part 2 of that coming up, but it's a good question. Okay. That's just a statistical that shows that regional conferences have grown 4 times faster. Okay. You've heard of most of these individuals. C.D. Brooks, who was my first pastor. E.E. Cleveland, let's go to the next. Charles Bradford, C.E. Dudley. These men got 3 of the 4 got their start, and the 4th one only worked for a state conference, Elder Bradford, for just a few months. All of these men were nurtured in regional conferences and may not have ever had a job if it weren't for regional conferences. Okay. All right, let's go, let's continue. Okay, and there are some regional conference entities. Now here's where we're gonna close. All right, let's go to the next slide. 7 reasons why we still need regional conferences. All right, here's the first one. Regional conferences allow us to control our own resources. Remember earlier I said that we built a $9 million office building with no debt? That's because regional conferences control their own resources. Okay? And that's the disadvantage to what you have out here. Because you don't have your own regional conferences, you are reliant on the union to give you the money to operate and to do ministry, okay? And I'm sure they do what they think is the best they can. But I would always rather have my own than have somebody give me something. Okay. All right. There would be no Charles E. Dudley building, that's our office building right there, nor a regional retirement plan without regional conferences. Once upon a time, the North American Division ran a pension program for its retirees. But here was the problem. First of all, you couldn't get the full amount until you worked 40 years. And when you finished that 40 years, you got somewhere around $1,200, maybe $1,500 a month. That's what you had to live on. Okay? Now, I don't know too many people that could do that today. Okay? And here was the worst part. there was here's the two worst parts. Despite not paying very much, in the year just before 2000, they discovered that their pension program, was $1 billion, not a million, $1 billion underwater, $1 billion underfunded. Okay, so the next time people tell you that black people can't run something, we didn't run $1 billion deficit. All right. So this is what the NAD did. They said, okay, as of January 1, 2000, we will maintain our commitment to the people who are already retired, but everybody else, yeah, you're done. Okay. There were two things wrong with that. Let's say I'm as old as I am now, and I'm getting ready to retire, but I'm not retiring yet. So I'm at 2000. I'm at 2000, and you're telling me if I'm not already on retirement, I'm not getting anything. Okay. So that's okay if I'm 25. It's not okay if I'm 65. Because now at 25 I can start all over. You can't do that at 65. But it gets worse. There was what was called, I don't know if they called it the widow's benefit, but that's what it benefited widows. So that meant, under the old system, if I died, my wife got a portion of what I got. They cut that out. Okay? Now, here's what was bad about that. In those days, the people who were old enough to be on retirement, most of their wives had not worked outside the home. So they didn't have anything. Okay. So, but the regional conferences said in 2000, they said, okay, we're not going to underpay you while you work and then not give you a retirement. So we started our own retirement program, okay, where each conference gives 10.25% of their tithe. So last year, the tithe of all the regional conferences was roughly $230 million. So that meant into our pension plan went about $22 million, $20 million or so, somewhere around that, okay? So right now, that plan is fairly healthy, as people like me, the baby boomers, are moving into their retirement year. All right? So, and the good thing about that is, remember I told you the other plan, you got about $1,200 a month, somewhere around that. Okay, our plan, and because I work for South Central, which has a separate plan, when I retire, in a very short while, when I retire, in fact, I've already told my staff, as the Bible would say, the day and the hour. Okay, so I'm not long for this world in terms of working. Okay, I think after 46 years. Okay, all right. Okay, so the regional, but because of the regional conference retirement plan, I will actually make more in salary when I retire than I'm making now. Okay, because regional conferences control their own resources. All right. Okay, reason number 2, which is really more important than reason number 1. Regional conferences are the best way to reach people of color with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, are the people of color the only people we should? No. But our first responsibility is the people of color. Because if we don't do that, then who's going to do it? Okay. All right. Reason number 3. Regional conferences give people of color a seat at the denominational decision-making table. Okay, let me give you an example. When I was a conference president, I was automatically a delegate to General Conference. Because the General Conference delegate representation goes to a large degree by entities. In other words, if you have your own entity, then you get a delegate. Okay? So if there were no regional conferences, then we would be reduced used to raising our hand and saying, hey, when you select delegates, remember us, please remember. But we don't have to do that. Okay? All right. Regional conferences are a better economic model. We already showed you that. Remember we had the 6 people up here? We showed you how much it costs to operate all the state conferences as opposed to Miss Lake Region. Remember that? Okay. Regional conferences are one of the greatest success stories in our church since 1944. And here's the thing. All of us have the same obligation to fund the rest of the church. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say this morning you were faithful in your tithe and you make a lot of money, and so you put $1,000 of tithe in there, right? Okay, so all $1,000 of that does not stay in your local conference. About 25% of that goes on to the general conference and to the union and the division, okay? And then your conference operates on what's left. All of us have to give that 25%, but that 25% digs deeper in regional conferences because we had less to start with in the first place. Let me give you an example. South Atlantic Conference covers primarily North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia, all right? The three state conferences that cover that same area do about $100 million in tithe. South Atlantic does $30 million of tithe. Same territory, okay? So that means when those entities give their 25%, they got $75 million left. South Atlantic only had $30 million in the first place. So before the treasurer in South Atlantic writes that first check, she's $45 million behind. Per year. So, people say, oh, black people don't know. No, it's not that black regional conferences don't know how to operate. They just have less money. Okay. Here's what I'd like to know. I'd like to see what state conferences would do if they had to operate on our money. Because I know what to do with $45 million more. You give me $45 million more a year, I know what to do with that. Okay. What I don't know what to do is how to operate with $45 million less. Yeah. The Lord has blessed regional conferences. All right? Here's reason number 6. Black churches are usually the only churches inside the city limits of our major cities. And that's where the people are. Okay? Regional conferences are where the people are. All right? And then last, racism is not dead in the United States, nor is it likely to die. I still remember the night Barack Obama got elected. And I was saying, okay, maybe things have changed. And they have changed somewhat, praise the Lord, but they haven't changed all the way. And you know what? Now I know they're not going to. Okay, all right? And so for the sake of the gospel, given the context that we operate, what's the best thing for mission? And that's regional conferences. Okay, all right. Here I close with 3 myths about regional conferences. All right, here's the first myth. They're a relic of segregation. Regional conferences are not the cause of segregation. Regional conferences are the result of segregation. But here's the second myth. If regional conferences would go away, we could all come together. Okay? The truth of the matter is, what happens? What you have on the West Coast demonstrates that's not true. Now, most churches, and this is an exception, praise the Lord, but I have the opportunity of preaching up and down the West Coast. The West Coast churches are every bit as segregated any church we go. This is an exception. Okay? I've probably preached in about 25 churches on the West Coast. 2 of them actually have any level of integration at all. Okay? This, as Al Gore would say, this is the inconvenient truth. You all don't have any more, generally speaking, any more integration than we do. You also don't have a structure that allows you to control your own resources. So you have neither integration or power. Okay. Now, we don't have integration either, but we have power. Okay. Now, would it be better? Would it be better if we actually could all come together? Yeah. Yeah, that would be better. That would be better. Okay? But it's not going to happen. Here's why I know. Here's the last myth. That integration is something other than a one-way street. It's not. It's not. It's not. Because, let's go to the next slide. Here's the hard truth. Black people seek a diversity that doesn't seek us. Here's what we know, both in the world and in the church, with some rare exceptions. If enough black people show up in a white entity, what happens to the white people in that entity? They leave. You cannot integrate with people that do not want to integrate with you. And before everybody says, oh, what's wrong with the Seventh-day Adventist church? That's true, period. It's even true outside the United States. Okay? I had the privilege of preaching in London for their camp meeting, which is outside of London. Okay? That used to be a white conference. That's a black conference now. But here's the most egregious example. Greater New York. That's a You obviously are from there. Okay. That's the most egregious example. Greater New York is the state conference that covers New York City primarily. Okay, we all know New York City is the largest city in the country by far. New York City is roughly as big as the next 2 cities put together. Los Angeles, Chicago is as big as the next 2 put together. Okay. There are there used to be a state conference there of white people, white Adventists. Okay. There are virtually no more white churches in New York. None. Okay, now we're not talking about Pasco. We're not talking about that. We're talking about New York. Okay, largest city. Where did we, in essence, lost a whole conference? That's what she asked. Good question. She asked, where did they go? There can only be one of 3 answers. They all died. That's not true. They didn't all die. They didn't all die. They disappeared into the Hudson River. Probably not, right? The only other option is confronted with a choice between truly integrated churches, they stayed home. I can't tell you if that there aren't. You know, there may be, I might have missed 1 or 2, okay? But you can't, they in essence lost the whole conference. A whole conference. A whole conference. Okay. So, now the conference still exists, but the churches are all African American, and by that I mean the Caribbean, my Caribbean brethren, or Latino. All their churches. And so this is why I tell people, this is the greatest building plan in the world. You don't have to raise money. You don't have to do a capital campaign. Just get a bunch of y'all to move into a church where a bunch of y'all. Now, it's okay. Now I'm saying that lightly, but you have to deal with what is as opposed to what you wish would be. Okay, I think it would be, because I think we can learn from each other. I think if we really had integration, we could learn from each other. Okay, black people can learn that church doesn't have to be long to be good. We could learn, and you all apparently have learned that lesson. We were out at 12, 15. That's good. Our Caucasian brethren can learn that you can actually express yourself, and you can talk. The preacher can talk above a whisper. We can learn from each other. That's what would happen in a perfect world. But we don't exist in a perfect world. So people say things like, there are not going to be black conferences and white conferences in heaven. Not going to be any conferences in heaven. Not going to be the general conference. So nobody's saying let's get rid of the general conference. Okay? If you don't know your history, you allow people to say, we don't need what you have. Okay? When the truth of the matter is, what we have actually works better. Okay. But we actually need, we need whatever we can get to finish the work. Right? Okay, that's what we need. And there are, and I've done this presentation in primarily Caucasian settings. And what I've said to them is, stop thinking that we're going to close down and come to you. That's not going to happen, okay? What we need to discuss is, where can these different entities work together? What are because they're not going to, we're not going to go away minus something catastrophic. So let's talk about what we can do together. And one of the things that I really think we can do together, but we don't, is education. We're running two separate education systems, and both of us are struggling. Now, here the challenge is, historically, whatever it is, once it is no longer majority Caucasian, then we lose the Caucasians. So it would be hard to do that, but it would make sense to, instead of both of us struggling, because and the cost of Christian education is only going one way until the Lord comes, and that's up. And the other challenge is, and there's several reasons for that. One is parents are not as committed to church school. Two is the cost is up. And three is there are not as many children as we used to have. There are just not as many. Sometimes, yes, there's just not as many. I have two sisters and a brother. There were four of us. When I was growing up, everybody had 4 kids. My two sisters and my brother and I together, we don't have 4 kids. The 4 of us don't have 4 kids. Oh, how many families of 4 and 5 kids do you know now? How many families? It's not very many people. Kids cost too much. So people don't have kids. But that affects our system. There's just not as many children to go around. Okay? And now what's happening is that same problem, which we've been dealing with for years, on the elementary and high school level, now it's rolled up to the college level. It took, and I told them years ago, I said, the same stuff that's happening to us is going to happen to y'all in a little while. It just took them, because they're dealing with older students, it took longer. And we've already had one college close, and we got some more that are having some issues because they're simply not as many children as we used to have, and our state conferences are not growing like they used to, and they're aging out. AUC closed a few years ago. Atlantic Union, yeah, that closed a few years ago. Okay. All right. Now, so I'm done. I don't know if there are any questions, or you're either ready to go home, or this was just so absolutely clear you don't have any questions. Okay, so I'm assuming it's one or the other, but I'm good. I'm good. Did you get your question answered as to why? Okay. Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate you. Oh, yes, got a question from our AV guy. Well, let me answer it this way. We've already started, right. What I was saying was we've already seen that on the first place we saw it was in boarding schools, okay? The boarding schools have been dropping like flies because they cost a heap of money to operate, just a ton of money to operate. And you have parents who are much more reluctant to send their children away from home at 14 and 15 and all that kind of stuff. And then you don't have the same way to offset the tuition that you have in college. You can't find grants as easily. So the first thing that bit the dust were boarding schools. Then you're starting to see, like in my conference, I think once upon a time there might have been 11 or 12. I think they're down to like 8, because you really have to make a commitment to operate church school because the cost just keeps going up, So I think I think eventually that trend is going to get to it may take another 15, 20 years if the Lord doesn't come, because it's harder to close a university because a university has constituents, But I do think the cost of operating universities and colleges will outstrip our willingness to pay for at least some of them. I don't think Adventist education on a higher level is going to go away, but I think, I'll give you an example. AUC is an example. When our Caucasian students stopped going to AUC, they were done. AUC was done. AUC at the end was a black school, okay? And that wasn't going to work. Where you're seeing minorities grow are places like Andrews and Washington Adventist College. I don't know if there's enough black people to sustain schools like that. So I do think the same thing you've seen on the elementary and the high school level, you will see on the college level. It'll take longer, but I think you'll see it. All right? Well, you have been wonderful. I very much appreciate your time. I know this is the other side of the world for you, but if you're ever in Huntsville, please come by and see our building and our museum. Pastor Watkins, thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity. And as I give the mic back, I don't usually do this, but I'm officially inviting myself back next year. So I want to bring Miss Edmond next time. So I'm
She said, please come back.
yes. Well, thank you very much, Pastor.
Well, let us prepare. We're going to close out. You heard him say he's inviting himself back. Now, if you would like him to come back by, applause, let us know that that's what you would like to happen.
I don't know if I wanted you to ask that question. Suppose they didn't. That would have been bad.
They're nice people.
But I thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Yeah, it was really great. Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming. We're going to go ahead and pray over because we know that you have to get on the road. Are you about to hit the road now? Yes, okay. He has to drive to Seattle. That's why we had to, no, he can't fly. His car is not flying. He might fly down the road.
It was less expensive to drive to Seattle. So I can still do that.
You had to drive to Seattle? Well, I'm going to invite our Elder Simeon, to come, and if he would be willing to pray over you for traveling mercies so that you will be able to make it there with no tickets and no problems and in the bad weather, and we're just going to commit you into God's hands.
Our loving Heavenly Father, how grateful it is to have Pastor Edmond to be here with us over this Sabbath. Lord, we thank you for the message that he had delivered this morning through your Spirit, the encouragement, Father, the direction. Lord, we thank thee for this program this evening that is helping us to understand, Father, our history and our culture. And Lord, helping us to focus more so on what we can do together to hasten your coming. We pray, Father, that you'll grant unto him safe traveling mercies, that his car may experience no difficulties, that he may arrive at his destination safely and may be able to travel home. Bless him and keep him, his family, and, Father, us here as well. We pray, O Lord, that you'll continue to work within the hearts and minds of your people, stirring them to your will and to what you have in store for this church. Father, into your hands do I commit Elder Edmond, this church body, and this community, Lord, that we may work with you as co-laborers and hasten your coming. We pray all these things in the precious name of Jesus and for his sake. Amen.